Are you serious? My grandmother's a saint, and you're calling her a thief?
Stand down and save the sermon. A courtroom is for evidence, the emotional outbursts.
Evidence? Your evidence is a stack of lies from a company that values money over a dying animal.
You're telling me she's a what? The shout wasn't from the plaintiff or the defendant. It erupted from the grandson, a young man in a faded army t-shirt named Leo, who was now on his feet, his chair screeching back on the tile floor of Judge Sarah Finch's courtroom. He was pointing a trembling finger at the well-dressed woman at the plaintiff's table. A professional surrogate? For ADOG. The gallery, packed for what they thought was a simple property dispute, buzzed with confused energy. Cameras swiveled. Judge Sarah Finch, a woman with a stare that could frost glass, did not bang her gavel. She simply let the silence expand until it pressed down on Leo, forcing him back into his seat beside his grandmother Dot. At the defendant's table sat Evelyn Ross, 78 years old. Her hands, knotted with arthritis, were folded neatly over the handle of her walking cane. She wore a simple pressed dress, her white hair in a careful bun. Her face was a mask of quiet dignity, but her eyes, fixed on nothing, were red-rim dot. At the plaintiff's table sat Camille Sterling, mid-40s, in a sharp pantsuit that probably cost more than Evelyn's monthly rent. A leather portfolio sat before her. She looked pained, as if the very air in the courtroom was beneath her. "Mr. Diaz," Judge Finch said, her voice a low, controlled thing. "You will speak through me. You're here because Ms. Sterling has filed a civil suit against your grandmother for breach of contract and theft of services. The amount in question is $8,400. She turned her head slowly, like a turret. "Miss Sterling, you are..." "What, exactly?" Camille Sterling stood, smoothing her suit. "Your Honor, I am the founder and CEO of Positive Connections, a boutique concierge service for high-net-worth pet owners. We provide curated luxury care experiences. One of our premium services is canine companionship surrogacy." Judge Finch blinked once, very slowly. "Elaborate." "In small words, for clients who travel extensively or have demanding careers, their dogs can experience loneliness, which leads to anxiety and behavioral issues. My company employs trained surrogates, like myself, who visit the client's home, wear an item of the client's clothing, and engage the dog in the owner's typical activities, watching specific TV shows, following set walking routes, using prescribed affection scripts. It maintains the dog's emotional equilibrium in the owner's absence." The courtroom was dead silent, processing the absurdity. Leo put his head in his hands. "And the defendant, Evelyn Ross, was your client?" Judge Finch asked. "No, Your Honor. My client is Mr. Arthur Brenner, a venture capitalist who resides at 1244 Skyview Terrace, penthouse, at his beloved Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, Sir Wellington, is the beneficiary of our surrogacy package. Ms. Ross was our contracted third-party dog walker for Sir Wellington's midday constitutional. She was referred by the building's concierge." Judge Finch looked at Evelyn. "Ms. Ross, how long did you walk this dog?" Evelyn's voice was a fragile thread. "For 11 months, Your Honor, every weekday, at 1 p.m. sharp, Mr. Brenner's assistant would leave Sir Wellington with the doorman. I'd take him for 30 minutes around the park. He was a sweet boy. Liked to watch the pigeons." "And what," Judge Finch said, turning back to Camille, "is the nature of the breach?" Camille's expression hardened. 2 months ago, Ms. Ross ceased her services without notice. More egregiously, she ceased while in possession of Sir Wellington. She did not return him to the doorman. She took him. We have GPS data from the dog's luxury tracker collar, a Populse Elite, which streams vitals and locations showing her diverting from the route and traveling to her residence in Brooklyn. She then disabled the collar. Sir Wellington was missing for 7 hours, causing my client immense distress and triggering a clause in our service guarantee that requires a full refund of the quarterly surrogacy fee, $8,400, which we had to pay to Mr. Brenner. We are suing to recover that loss, plus damages." A murmur ran through the room. "She stole the dog?" Leo jumped up again, but this time his voice was choked. That's not what happened. She didn't steal him. She was saving him. Mr. Diaz. Judge Finch's voice cracked out. Sit down. She focused on Evelyn, who had begun to cry, silent tears tracking through the wrinkles on her cheeks. Ms. Ross, did you take the dog to your home? Evelyn nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue from her sleeve. Yes, Your Honor. Why? Evelyn took a shaky breath. Because he was burning up. The statement landed softly, but with strange weight. Judge Finch leaned forward. Explain. That day, it was so hot. Over 95 degrees. The pavement was... It was cooking. I met him at the door, like always. But when I took the leash, he just laid down on the cool marble. He was panting so hard his whole body shook. His tongue was too big for his mouth. Her voice gained a sliver of strength. I told the doorman, this dog is sick. He needs a vet, the doorman said. My instructions are to hand the dog to you at 1, Mr. Brenner's assistant said. The walk is non-negotiable for his schedule. I called the number I had for the assistant. It went to voicemail. I looked at this little dog, struggling to breathe, and I couldn't put him on that hot street. So I took him to the only place I knew was cool and safe. My apartment. I have air conditioning, and the collar. Judge Finch pressed out. Evelyn looked ashamed. It started beeping. Then a voice came out of it. A man's voice. It said, return to designated rope. You are off-grid. It scared me. Sir Wellington was trembling worse. I thought it was electric hurting him, so I took it off. It stopped beeping then. Camille Sterling scoffed audibly. Your Honor, the Paw Pulse Elite has a gentle, pre-recorded audio cue to prevent dog napping. It is not an electric shock device. Her irrational fear does not justify theft. She could have taken him to a vet. She chose instead to kidnap him, causing a 7-hour manhunt. Leo couldn't stay silent. She's 78. She doesn't have money for a vet. She was panicking. And when she called the building back, they told her Mayor Brenner was in a critical merger negotiation and could not be disturbed, not even for his dying dog. Judge Finch held up a hand, silencing the room. Her eyes were fixed on Camille Sterling. Miss Sterling, a question. In your surrogate script, is there a protocol for a medical emergency involving the animal? Asterisk. Camille shifted. The protocol is to contact the primary owner or their designated emergency contact immediately, and if they are unreachable, the surrogate uses their best judgment to seek veterinary care with expenses reimbursed. And was Ms. Ross given this protocol? Or the emergency contact? Ms. Ross was a walker, not a surrogate. Her contact was the building concierge, who told her the walk was non-negotiable. Judge Finch stated, her voice flat. She looked at the weeping old woman, then at the impeccably dressed CEO, then at the GPS log entered into evidence, showing the dot moving from the luxury high-rise to a modest Brooklyn address and stopping. Something in the math didn't add up. Miss Sterling, Judge Finch said, her tone deceptively calm. Your company had to refund $8,400 because the dog was missing for 7 hours. But according to Ms. Ross, she had the dog the entire time in her apartment. You located him via the last GPS ping at her address, yes? Yes, so you knew exactly where he was. Why was this considered a missing dog scenario that triggered a full refund, instead of a simple phone call to Ms. Ross to say, please return the dog? For the first time, Camille Sterling's flawless composure showed a hairline fracture. She glanced at her lawyer, a man who had been silent so far. The situation was volatile. We believe the dog was in unsafe, unauthorized hands. Our guarantee to our client is absolute peace of mind. Any deviation constitutes a failure. Judge Finch didn't reply. She picked up the evidence photo of Sir Wellington, a fluffy, fawn-colored spaniel with big sad eyes. She looked at Evelyn Ross, who had risked a lawsuit to give an overheated dog a glass of water and a cool floor to lie on. Miss Sterling, the judge said finally, this paw pulse collar, it monitors vitals. Yes, heart rate, respiration, body temperature, activity levels. The data feeds to an app. And on the day in question, at approximately 1:15 p.m., what did Sir Wellington's vital signs indicate? The fracture widened. Camille Sterling's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, that data is proprietary to our client's wellness portal, and I'm not asking your client. Judge Finch interrupted, her eyes never leaving Camille. I'm asking you. You sued this woman. You are alleging her actions caused distress and financial loss. The dog's physiological state at the moment she made her decision is highly relevant. Did his collar indicate he was in distress? The courtroom waited. Camille Sterling's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked at her lawyer, who gave a subtle, resigned nod. The data, she said carefully, showed elevated core temperature and panting levels consistent with heat stress. Judge Finch leaned back, a predator that has scented blood. Consistent with heat stress, so the dog was sick. The walker, seeing this, removed him from the extreme heat. She tried to call for help and was ignored. She took him to a cool, safe place. And for this act of compassion, you sued her for $8,400. It was a breach of contract. Camille insisted, but her voice had lost its steel. Judge Finch picked up her gavel, but didn't strike it. She looked directly into the camera. I have one more question, and the answer will determine everything. But first, if you're watching this and you think this is just about a dog, you're wrong. This is about what we value. Subscribe, because what happens next will show you exactly where the line is between a contract and a conscience. She turned back to Camille, her gaze icy. Miss Sterling, the $8,400 you refunded to Mr. Brenner, was that the total cost of his quarterly surrogacy package? Camille paused, wary. Yes, Your Honor. Break it down for me. How much of that $8,400 was for the dog walker? For Evelyn Ross. The walker service was a separate minor line item, $1.25 per walk, and the rest. The other, let's see, $8,150. That covered the surrogate companionship sessions, the biometric monitoring, the curated activity planning, the emotional equilibrium reporting. $8,150, Judge Finch repeated slowly. For someone to wear an owner's bathrobe and watch Succession with a dog. She let the absurdity hang in the air, thick and sour. Here is what I think happened. Miss Sterling, I think Sir Wellington got sick. I think your system failed him. I think an old woman with more heart than your entire company saved him. And I think you saw a chance to make your $8,400 back by squeezing the only person in this chain who couldn't fight back. Am I warm? Camille Sterling said nothing. Her face was stone. Judge Finch's smile was thin and cold. We're going to take a recess. And when we come back, we're going to talk about who really failed who. And we're going to start by subpoenaing every single line of that Paw Pulse data from the last year. This isn't a breach of contract case anymore. This is a case of gross negligence. Dressed up in a very, very expensive suit. The gavel fell. Crack. The crack of the gavel wasn't an ending. It was a starting pistol. Judge Sarah Finch didn't leave the bench. She watched Camille Sterling and her lawyer huddle in a frantic, whispering conference. She saw Leo Diaz put a steadying arm around his grandmother, Evelyn, whose tears had dried into a look of stunned confusion. The gallery buzzed like a kicked hive. Bailiff, Judge Finch said, her voice cutting through the noise. During this recess, you will escort Miss Sterling and her counsel to my chambers. No? It wasn't a request. The bailiff moved, a wall of uniformed authority. She then looked at Leo and Evelyn. Mr. Diaz, Ms. Ross, please wait outside. My clerk will bring you some water. Do not speak to anyone from the press. Her tone was firm, but not unkind. She was isolating the players, controlling the board. In her chambers, the air was cooler, quieter, but no less charged. Judge Finch sat behind her desk, not offering seats to Camille or her lawyer. She let them stand. Before we go back on the record, she began, steepling her fingers. I am going to give you one opportunity to withdraw this suit. With prejudice, meaning it can never be refiled. The lawyer, a man named Alden Reed, found his voice. Your Honor, that's highly irregular. We have a valid claim for damages stemming from what, Mr. Reed? Judge Finch interrupted, her eyes like chips of flint. From your client's failure to have a workable emergency protocol? From a system so rigid it would rather let a dog suffer heat stroke than disturb a merger meeting? Or from the embarrassing fact that your client's $8,000 emotional equilibrium service was maintained not by a surrogate in a silk robe, but by a 78-year-old woman making minimum wage? Camille Sterling drew herself up. Your Honor, the value of our service is proven by our client satisfaction. Mr. Brenner is a very powerful, very busy man. He pays for peace of mind. And did he have it? Judge Finch shot back. On the day his dog was panting itself toward a veterinary emergency, was his mind peaceful? Or was he on the phone with your company, demanding to know why the $15,000 collar he bought was telling him his dog's core temperature was 104 degrees while his hired walker was being told the walk was non-negotiable? Asterisk a beat of silence. Alden Reed glanced at his client. That glance told Judge Finch everything. He didn't know about that call. You didn't tell your own lawyer about the client's panic call, did you, Miss Sterling? Judge Finch pressed, her voice a low, probing instrument. Because it doesn't fit the narrative of the unhinged dog napper. It paints a picture of a client who is terrified because your own technology showed him his pet was in danger, and your human system failed to respond. Camille's cheeks flushed. We were managing the situation. We located the dog via GPS. You located the dog 7 hours later, Judge Finch corrected, her voice rising a decibel. The last ping was from Ms. Ross's apartment at 1:45 p.m. You didn't send anyone, call the police, or even call Ms. Ross until after 8 p.m. Why? What were you waiting for? Another telling silence. Alden Reed looked at his client, his professional mask slipping into confusion. Camille? Asterisk, we were verifying the situation, Camille said tightly, and managing Mr. Brenner's expectations. He was in a critical stop. Judge Finch held up a hand. I've heard enough about the critical merger. A dog is not a stock option. His suffering is not a negotiating tactic. She stood up, walking to the window overlooking the city. Here's my theory, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. Your entire business model is an illusion. You sell the idea of flawless, seamless, luxurious care. An emergency, a real, panting, suffering emergency shatters that illusion. So your first instinct wasn't to help the dog. It was to contain the bad publicity. To find a scapegoat to blame for the system's failure. You saw a retired widow with no resources and thought, perfect, you could sue her, recoup your refund, and present it to Mr. Brenner as you having taken decisive action against the perpetrator. You weren't suing for breach of contract. You were suing for cover-up. Camille Sterling's face was now pale. That is a gross mischaracterization, is it? Judge Finch turned from the window. Then you won't mind if, when we reconvene, I subpoena all internal communications from positive connections from that day. Emails, texts, Slack messages. Let's see what the situation management really looked like. Let's see if the words liability, bad review, or old lady come up more often than veterinarian. Alden Reed stepped forward, a last line of defense. Your Honor, that's a fishing expedition. It's not relevant to the core issue of Ms. Ross unlawfully taking the dog. It's entirely relevant to malice, Judge Finch fired back. It goes to the heart of your client's intent. This isn't a dispassionate business dispute. This is a targeted act of bullying. And in my courtroom, bullies lose. She walked back to her desk and picked up a file. We're going back in. But the case has changed. You are now also defending against a potential counterclaim for malicious prosecution and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Ms. Ross may not have a lawyer, but I am duty-bound to ensure the law protects her from predatory litigation. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Judge Finch took her seat, her gaze sweeping the room. We are back on the record. Ms. Sterling, your attorney has informed me you are considering your options. But before you decide, I want to hear from Mr. Arthur Brenner. Asterisk, the name dropped like a stone. Camille Sterling went rigid. Your Honor, Mr. Brenner is an extremely private man. He is not a party to this suit. Dragging him into this circus would be, he is the only party who matters to the dog, Judge Finch stated flatly. He's the owner. He paid for his service. He received a refund after a traumatic event. I want to know from him if he believes Evelyn Ross stole his dog, or if he believes she saved Sir Wellington from a system he paid a fortune to trust. She turned to the bailiff. My clerk has a phone number. She will call it on speaker in this courtroom right now. If Mr. Brenner chooses not to answer, we will note his refusal. But I suspect a man who pays for canine surrogates will want to speak for his dog. The theatricality of it was pure Judge Judy. The camera operators leaned in. This was the moment the billionaire client confronted with the reality of his luxury service. The clerk dialed. The ring echoed in the silent room. Once, twice, asterisk, a click. A smooth, male voice, slightly annoyed. This is Arthur Brenner. Mr. Brenner, Judge Finch said, her voice projecting across the room. This is Judge Sarah Finch. You are on speakerphone in my courtroom. Part of a case involving your dog, Sir Wellington, and your service provider, Positive Connections. A long pause. I was not informed of this. That is becoming apparent, Judge Finch said. I need to ask you a direct question. On the afternoon of July 12th, when your dog's collar alerted you to his elevated vitals, and your dog walker, Evelyn Ross, took him to her home, did you consider that a criminal act of theft? Asterisk another pause, longer. The sound of a keyboard clicking stopped. Theft? No, I was furious, but not at her. I was furious at Camille. The collar showed Wellington was in distress. I called her, screaming. Her people kept telling me they were locating the asset for hours. They called him an asset. I finally got a call from some building doorman who said the walker, a nice old lady, had taken him because he was overheating. She gave him water, let him lie on her kitchen floor. She probably saved him a trip to the emergency vet. The gallery erupted. Camille Sterling closed her eyes. Asterisk. So, Judge Finch continued, her eyes locked on Camille's ashen face. You received a full refund from Positive Connections because of their failure. Did you know they then sued that nice old lady for the exact amount they refunded you? $8,400. Silence on the phone. Then a low, dangerous whisper. They did what? They are suing Evelyn Ross for breach of contract, claiming her actions caused your distress and triggered the refund clause. That is grotesque. Arthur Brenner's voice was cold with disgust. I want nothing to do with this. Drop me from whatever you need to. The refund was for their incompetence, not hers. If I'd known they were targeting her... Jesus. Thank you, Mr. Brenner. That is all. Wait, the voice stopped her. Is the woman there? Ms. Ross. Evelyn, startled, looked up at the speakerphone. Leo nudged her. Yes, sir, she whispered. Thank you, Arthur Brenner said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. For taking care of him. He's sitting right here. He's fine. The line went dead, the truth, from the mouth of the only client who mattered, now hung in the room. Suffocating Camille Sterling's case, Judge Finch let the silence stretch. Let the jury of public opinion in the gallery and online render its verdict with their stunned expressions. Then she spoke. Miss Sterling, your star witness just exonerated the defendant and condemned you. Your case, as filed, is dead. But we are not done. Not by a long shot. Because now we have to discuss what your lawsuit did to Evelyn Ross. She looked at Evelyn, who was trembling not with fear, but with a sudden, overwhelming relief. The malicious prosecution counterclaim is now active. And we are going to discover exactly how many other minor line items, like Evelyn Ross, you've bullied to cover up your company's failures. This recess is over. The real trial starts now. She picked up the gavel but didn't strike it. She pointed it at Camille Sterling like an accusation. Next up, your company's books. And your soul, if you have one. We'll see which is in worse shape. Asterisk, the truth, spoken by Arthur Brenner's disembodied voice, had evaporated the polished facade of the case, leaving behind the ugly, twisted metal of the real story. The air in the courtroom wasn't just tense now. It was thick with the scent of a predator cornered. Camille Sterling wasn't just losing a lawsuit. Her entire business model, an illusion of care built on contracts and scapegoats, was being dismantled, bolt by bolt. In front of a watching world, Judge Finch let the silence after Brenner's call stretch until it became a physical pressure on Camille's shoulders. Then she turned her gaze to Leo and Evelyn. "Mr. Diaz, you spoke of your grandmother's distress. Quantify it for me. Since receiving this lawsuit, what has her life been like?" Leo stood, his earlier fury now channeled into a cold, clear testimony. "Your Honor, she got the papers 3 months ago. She didn't understand most of it, but she saw the number, $8,400. She's lived in the same, rent-controlled apartment for 40 years. Her pension and Social Security cover her bills and her heart medication. That number, it might as well have been 8 million. She thought she'd lose her home. She stopped sleeping. She'd wake up crying, asking me if she was going to jail for trying to help a dog. She stopped going to her senior center. She was ashamed. She kept saying, I took something that wasn't mine. I had to show her the vet's letter over and over. Vet's letter?" Judge Finch pounced on the detail. "Yes, Your Honor, after that day. I was so angry I took Sir Wellington with Mr. Brenner's permission later to our own vet. I paid for it. I wanted proof." The vet examined him and reviewed the data from the caller's app that Mr. Brenner shared. He wrote a letter. It states that the dog was suffering from moderate to severe heat stress, that his airway was compromised, and that removing him from the heat and providing a cool, calm environment was, quote, the correct and potentially life-preserving course of action. Enter that letter as Exhibit A for the defense. Judge Finch instructed the clerk. The paper, simple and damning, was passed up. "Miss Sterling," Judge Finch said, her voice deceptively soft, "you sued this woman for taking a correct and potentially life-preserving course of action. Your own client, the dog's owner, thanks her. Your company's own biometric data confirmed the emergency. So I ask you again on the record, with your attorney present, what was the true purpose of this lawsuit?" Alden Reed, the lawyer, placed a hand on Camille's arm, a silent warning. But Camille was unraveling. The perfect CEO was gone, replaced by a woman whose empire was proving to be made of sand. It was a matter of principle. She violated the terms. She took private property. A living creature is not private property in the same way a wallet is. And you know it, Judge Finch shot back, her softness vanishing. The principle you're defending is the principle of total control. The principle that says even in a medical crisis, the algorithm, the schedule, the contract must win. That the human heart is a liability to be sued out of existence. She picked up the vet's letter. This letter cost maybe $150. A single 1-hour surrogate session for Sir Wellington costs, by your own breakdown, over $400. Why didn't your company just get this letter? One call to a vet would have clarified the entire situation. Instead, you chose the path of legal warfare against a senior citizen. That tells me this was never about principle. It was about punishment. You needed to make an example of someone to prove to your wealthy clients that any failure was never, ever the fault of positive connections. Asterisk. Judge Finch leaned forward, her eyes like drills. This counterclaim for malicious prosecution isn't just about legal fees. It's about the terror you inflicted. It's about sleepless nights and shame and a woman wondering if her last years will be spent in debt. But before we get to damages, I want a number from you, Miss Sterling. How many other Evelyn Rosses are out there? Camille stiffened. I don't know what you mean. Oh, I think you do. How many other independent contractors, walkers, groomers, sitters have you strong-armed? How many have you threatened with lawsuits for breach when they used common sense instead of your script? How many small, unrefundable deposits have you kept when a client's trip was canceled? Your business preys on the emotional attachment people have to their pets and the economic vulnerability of the people who care for them. It's a perfect predatory ecosystem. And today, we're pulling back the curtain. She turned to the bailiff. I am issuing a subpoena, effective immediately, for all of Positive Connections client and contractor records for the past 3 years. I want every non-disclosure agreement, every complaint filed by a contractor, every instance where a refund was denied or a fee was withheld. I want to see the pattern. Alden Reed was on his feet. Your Honor, this is a staggering overreach. This is a simple civil dispute. You can't just go on a fishing expedition into a private company's entire history. This stopped being simple the moment your client decided to use my courtroom as a weapon to bludgeon a compassionate old woman. Judge Finch declared, her voice rising to fill the room. You opened the door, counselor. You sued. You made her life, her health, her financial stability the subject of this litigation. That gives me wide latitude to discover the truth of your client's motives and practices. And if I find a pattern of this behavior, which I suspect, I will, then this case becomes a class action counterclaim in the blink of an eye. She let the threat hang in the air. A class action? Dozens, maybe hundreds of Evelyn Rosses. The financial and PR ruin would be absolute. Camille Sterling looked at her lawyer, a silent plea for a miracle. He had none. Your Honor, Camille said, her voice stripped of all its earlier confidence, hollow and small. What would it take to resolve this? Now, Judge Finch didn't smile. She calculated. First, you will dismiss your suit against Evelyn Ross with prejudice. In open court, you will state that her actions were reasonable and justified. Camille nodded, a jerky, mechanical motion. Yes. Second, you will pay her the $8,400 you sought from her. Well, not as damages. As a settlement. For the distress you caused. A check today, before you leave this building. Camille swallowed, her financial calculations visibly warring with her survival instinct. And the counterclaim? Drops, and we stop the discovery into your company's history. But there's a third condition. Asterisk. Judge Finch looked past Camille to the cameras. She was speaking to the world now. You will, within 30 days, rewrite every one of your client and contractor agreements. You will insert a clear, bold, unmistakable Good Samaritan clause. It will state that any contractor who, in good faith, believes a pet is in medical or immediate physical danger, has not just the right but the duty to seek appropriate care, even if it deviates from the prescribed routine, and they will face no penalty for doing so. You will also establish a 24-hour emergency vet line, paid for by you, that any contractor can call for immediate authorization. You will send these new agreements to every person in your database and post them publicly on your website. It was a complete overhaul. It was a surrender. Camille Sterling, the founder and CEO, deflated. The fight was gone. She had been outmaneuvered, exposed, and stripped of her narrative. Agree. Asterisk. No, Judge Finch said, her final blow delivered with icy precision. You don't just agree. You will say it. On the record. So everyone hears what real responsibility sounds like. She gestured for the court reporter to ready herself. Miss Sterling, for the record, please state your understanding of the terms. Camille took a shaky breath, facing the microphone, her empire in ruins. I dismiss the suit against Evelyn Ross. I will pay her $8,400 today. I will rewrite all contracts to include a Good Samaritan clause and establish an emergency line. Judge Finch gave one slow, final nod. She looked at Evelyn, who was weeping again, but this time into Leo's shoulder, tears of unimaginable relief. The court accepts the terms. The plaintiff's case is dismissed with prejudice. The counterclaim is withdrawn. Miss Sterling, the bailiff will escort you to the clerk's office to cut the check. Court is adjourned. She brought the gavel down. Crack. But as people began to move, Judge Finch spoke one last time, not into the microphone, but loud enough for the front rows to hear, ensuring the cameras caught it. Sometimes, the most expensive service you can buy is a complete lack of humanity. Today, Miss Sterling, you just found out the true cost. Asterisk. The crack of the gavel should have been the end. But in Judge Sarah Finch's courtroom, justice had a final quiet act. As the gallery erupted in a murmur of stunned satisfaction and the cameras zoomed in on Evelyn Ross's tear-streaked face of relief, Judge Finch did not stand. She watched. She saw Camille Sterling, posture crumpled, being led by the bailiff toward the clerk's office, a hollowed-out shell of the sharp-suited CEO who had entered. She saw Alden Reed snap his briefcase shut with a definitive, defeated click, but her eyes lingered on Leo and Evelyn. Leo was hugging his grandmother, his own eyes squeezed shut against tears of rage and release. Evelyn was patting his back, whispering, "It's over, Mio, it's over," as if trying to convince herself. "Mr. Diaz," Judge Finch's voice cut through the dispersing crowd, firm but not unkind. "A moment, please. Before you go." Leo looked up, wary, his protective instincts snapping back into place. He helped Evelyn to her feet, keeping a supportive arm around her as they approached the bench. Judge Finch descended the few steps to stand on the same level. She wasn't towering now. She was conferring. "The check she's writing," Judge Finch said quietly. "It will clear. If it doesn't, you call this court directly. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor. Thank you," Leo said, his voice thick. "But that's not why I asked you to stay." Judge Finch's gaze shifted to Evelyn. "Ms. Ross, that day with the dog. You saw he was in trouble. You were given an order to walk him anyway, and you disobeyed. You chose kindness over compliance. In a world that runs on rules, that is a revolutionary act. And it cost you dearly." Evelyn nodded, her wise, clouded eyes finding the judge's face. "I just couldn't." I looked at his little eyes. They were so scared. The rules felt ... cruel. Asterisk, they were, Judge Finch agreed. And the system designed those rules counted on people obeying them. It counted on you being too afraid, too poor, too powerless to choose the right thing over the commanded thing. You broke their calculation. A faint, approving smile touched her lips. "The world needs more of your kind of trouble." She then looked at Leo. "You said she stopped going to her senior center? That she was ashamed?" Leo nodded, anger flashing again. "Yeah, she felt like a criminal." Everyone there saw the news vans outside her building when the papers were served. They talked. Judge Finch turned back to the courtroom, which was still half full of lingering spectators and reporters. She raised her voice, not to its commanding courtroom pitch, but to a clear, carrying tone that invited everyone to listen. "Everyone, please. Your attention for one more moment." The room quieted, cameras swinging back. "We have the legal resolution, but the human resolution is not complete. Evelyn Ross was publicly accused of being a thief, of having a criminal mind. That stain was broadcast. The check she will receive is for her financial distress. It does not clean that stain." She paused, letting the truth of that settle. "So we are going to clean it. Right now." She turned to the court clerk. "Please retrieve the original complaint filing from the docket." A rustle of paper, and the clerk handed her the document. Judge Finch held it up for the room to see. Then, with a dramatic, deliberate tear, she ripped the first page in half. The sound was shockingly loud. She dropped the pieces into the small wastebasket beside her bench. "A symbolic gesture, yes," she said, looking at Evelyn. "But sometimes symbols are all we have to show that the past has been cancelled." She then addressed the room, and by extension, the lenses of every phone and camera. "The record will show the case was dismissed. But I want you all to witness what that means. It means the accusation was false. It means the plaintiff was wrong. It means Evelyn Ross acted with compassion and integrity. Share that. Let the algorithm that broadcast her shame now broadcast her vindication." Asterisk, she then did something utterly unexpected. She walked around the bench and offered her hand to Evelyn. After a stunned moment, Evelyn took it. Judge Finch didn't shake it. She held it. "The court thanks you for your decency, Ms. Ross, and it apologizes for the harm this process caused you." It was a seismic shift. The power dynamic wasn't just leveled. It was inverted. The judge was serving the judged. She released Evelyn's hand and looked at Leo. "Take your grandmother back to her center. Hold your head high. And if anyone has a question, you tell them to watch the tape. The truth is on the record." As Leo, overwhelmed, guided Evelyn toward the doors, the courtroom spontaneously broke into applause. It started in the back, a few people, then swept forward, becoming a wave of sound that wasn't for the drama, but for the woman, Judge Finch did not acknowledge the applause. She returned to her bench, her face once more an unreadable mask of authority. But her work wasn't done. "Bailiff, please bring Miss Sterling back in." Without her lawyer. A few minutes later, a confused and wary Camille Sterling was escorted back into the now nearly empty courtroom. The check had been cut. The legal machinery had ground to a halt. She stood before the bench, alone. "Miss Sterling," Judge Finch began, her tone devoid of its earlier fire, now just cold and factual. "You will comply with the terms. The new contracts, the emergency line. My clerk will be in touch with your legal department in 1 week for proof of progress. This court will retain oversight for 12 months. Camille nodded, mute. Asterisk, but this isn't just about compliance. It's about consequence. You built a brand on the idea of love, but you operated on the principle of fear. You feared a bad review more than a suffering animal. You feared a breach of contract more than a breach of ethics. That fear made you cruel. And in my experience, cruelty is a habit. It's a business model you've perfected." Judge Finch leaned forward. "So I am going to give you a new fear. The fear of this." She gestured to the empty gallery, the silent cameras being packed away. "The fear of exposure. The fear of having your inner workings laid bare. Every quarter for the next year, you will send this court a report. Not just on the Good Samaritan Clause, but on contractor retention, on client complaint resolutions, on every single instance where the emergency line is used. You will operate for 1 year with the lights on full blast. And if I see one hint of the old patterns, one veiled threat to a walker, one unfair penalty, I will not fine you. I will release all of it to the press, to the state attorney general, to every pet owner's forum online. I will make positive connections a case study in how not to run an ethical business." Asterisk, it was a probation sentence for a corporation. A leash. Camille Sterling finally found her voice, a broken whisper. "You're ruining me." "No," Judge Finch corrected, her voice final. "You did that when you decided an old woman's piece was a fair trade for your profit margin. I'm just ensuring you rebuild into something that isn't a monster. Now you are dismissed." As Camille walked out, a shell of her former self, Judge Finch finally stood. The day was over. But she paused, looking at the empty defendant's table. Her clerk approached. "Judge, that was unprecedented. The oversight, the public apology." Judge Finch didn't look at her. She stared at the spot where Evelyn had sat. "The law isn't just about who wins or loses, Sarah. It's about who gets broken along the way. Today, we almost let it break the wrong person. We mended it. That's all." Asterisk, she walked out of the courtroom, not through the public door, but through her private entrance. The drama was over. But in living rooms and on phones everywhere, the video was just starting to spread. The ripped-up complaint, the held hand, the applause. It wasn't just a verdict. It was a correction. And for Leo and Evelyn, walking into the afternoon sun, the weight was gone. The check in Leo's pocket was one thing, but the lifted shame, the public vindication, that was everything. They didn't go home. They went straight to the senior center. And as they walked in, a hush fell, followed by a burst of cheers. Someone had been live streaming on their phone. Evelyn Ross, who had felt invisible for months, was seen. Truly seen. Not as a defendant, but as a hero. And in the modern world, sometimes that's the only justice that truly heals. Asterisk, but in a penthouse across town, Arthur Brenner watched the clip on his tablet, Sir Wellington in his lap. He saw the ripped paper. He saw the old woman's face. He typed a quick, decisive email to his personal assistant, cancel all contracts with positive connections, permanently, find me a local, woman-owned dog care service, and send a basket of gourmet treats from that artisanal place. Addressed to Evelyn Ross. The market, it turned out, also had a conscience. And it was about to vote. Asterisk. 6 weeks later, the story had legs. It wasn't just a viral clip. It was a cultural moment. Memes of Judge Finch ripping the complaint were everywhere. The phrase, "Evelyn Ross that dog," became shorthand for choosing basic decency over blind bureaucracy. News segments debated the commodification of care. A state senator, snowing both justice and votes, announced hearings on contractor protections in the gig economy, calling it the Evelyn Ross bill. But in her small, tidy apartment in Brooklyn, Evelyn Ross was just trying to get back to normal. The $8,400 check had been cashed. She paid off a small medical debt, bought a new, more comfortable armchair, and insisted on putting the rest in a savings account for Leo's future. The fear was gone, but a new, subtle anxiety had replaced it, the anxiety of being known. Her phone, a simple flip phone, would occasionally ring with numbers she didn't recognize. Sometimes it was a reporter. Sometimes it was a producer from a talk show. She always said no, her voice polite but firm. "I just want my quiet," she'd tell Leo. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, her doorbell rang. Not the buzzer for the building, but the soft chime at her own apartment door. She wasn't expecting Leo. Cautiously, she peered through the peephole. A young woman in a simple blouse and slacks stood there, holding a massive, ribbon-bedecked wicker basket. It was overflowing with gourmet treats, organic peanut butter biscuits shaped like bones, bags of freeze-dried salmon, a plush toy that looked like a judge's gavel, and on top, a heavy cream envelope. "Ms. Ross, my name is Anya. I work for Mr. Arthur Brenner. He asked me to deliver this to you personally." Evelyn, bewildered, opened the door. The woman placed the basket just inside with a warm smile. "He also asked me to tell you that Sir Wellington is doing wonderfully, and that he is eternally grateful." With a slight nod, she was gone. Evelyn brought the basket to her kitchen table. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope. The card inside was thick, luxurious paper. "Ms. Ross, a belated but sincere thank you. You saw my friend not as an asset, but as a living being in need. That is a clarity my money failed to buy. You have a friend for life in both of us. Please use the number below if you or your grandson ever need anything. With respect, Arthur Brenner." And Sir Wellington. A business card was paperclipped to the note. Just a name and a private cell number. No title. Evelyn sat down heavily. She wasn't being sued. She was being thanked by a billionaire. The world had truly turned upside down. Meanwhile, in a minimalist office with a stunning view, Camille Sterling was living in the upside down. The Sterling protocols, as the business blogs, now snidely called Judge Finch's mandates, were in place. The new contracts had been sent. The 24-hour vet line was active, but the client list was bleeding. Arthur Brenner's quiet exit had been a starting pistol. Other high-profile clients, not wanting to be associated with the puppy villain narrative, had drifted away. The quarterly report for the judge was a document of shrinkage. Her lawyer, Alden Reed, had advised a rebrand, a fresh start. But the internet has a long memory. A hashtag doesn't just trend, it stains. The final blow came not from a client, but from an employee. A former canine companionship surrogate named Maya, emboldened by the very public shaming of her ex-boss, gave an interview to a popular online outlet. She didn't just talk about the absurdity of the scripts. She talked about the pressure to ignore minor health issues, a limp, a loss of appetite because reporting anomalies reduces client satisfaction metrics. She revealed the internal nickname for contractors like Evelyn, disposables. Because if they caused a problem, you disposed of them legally. The article went nuclear. It confirmed everything Judge Finch had intuited. The business wasn't just predatory in one case. It was systemically soulless. The floodgates opened. 3 other former employees came forward. 2 independent walkers sued for wrongful termination after raising concerns about pets in their care. The Attorney General's office, prompted by the senator's hearings, opened a consumer protection investigation. Positive Connections didn't just shrink. It collapsed. The website went dark. The phone lines were disconnected. Camille Sterling's empire of curated care was officially a ghost town. On the day the AG's investigation was announced, Judge Sarah Finch was in her chambers, reviewing another case file. Her clerk brought in the tablet with the news headline. Judge Finch read it, her expression unchanging. She gave a single, slow nod, as if a ledger had been balanced to her exacting standards. No gloating. No satisfaction. Just the quiet acknowledgement of a correct equation finally solved. That evening, Leo was over at Evelyn's apartment for dinner. He'd seen the news. "They're gone," Abuela finished. Evelyn stirred a pot of arroz con palo, the familiar, comforting smell filling the kitchen. "It's a shame," she said, not turning around. "A shame? After what they did to you?" She turned then, her wise eyes meeting his. "It's a shame someone thought that was a good way to do business. To make everything about money and rules, and forget about the heart." She went back to stirring. "But I'm not glad they're gone. I'm just glad they can't do it to anyone else." That was the difference between vengeance and justice. Evelyn understood it instinctively. Judge Finch had enforced it legally. The story had one final quiet postscript. A local woman-owned pet care service, flooded with new clients after Brenner's very public endorsement, reached out to Evelyn. Not for an interview. For a job. They wanted her to be their head of contractor ethics and compassion training. A fancy title for a simple task. Teaching their walkers and sitters that the pet comes first, the contract second. That it was okay to use your heart. She took the job. It was remote, a few hours a week, advising by phone. The pay was modest but meaningful. They sent her a company t-shirt. On the back, it read, "What would Evelyn Ross do?" And so, the woman who had been sued for compassion became the standard for it. Judge Finch never spoke of the case again publicly, but those who watched closely noticed a subtle shift in her courtroom. In contract disputes, she began asking a new question, a simple, devastating question that cut through legal jargon. Where is the Evelyn Ross in this story? It forced lawyers to pause, to look past their clients and see the human collateral. It became her signature. The case of Positive Connections v. Ross was closed. But its echo changed things. A few walkers felt braver. A few companies wrote better clauses. A few pet owners looked harder at the services they used. And in a park in Brooklyn, an old woman with a kind face would sometimes sit on a bench. She didn't have a dog anymore, but occasionally a neighbor's pup would pull its owner over to her, sensing a friend. She'd lean down, her hands gentle, and give a soft scratch behind the ears. She wasn't a viral sensation there. She wasn't a legal precedent. She was just Evelyn. The woman who chose a cool kitchen floor over a hot sidewalk, who chose a living being over a line item, and in the end, against all the money, all the lawyers, and all the fear, that simple choice had won. Not just in court, but everywhere.